Hi, I am Patricia, 32 years old, and a self-made financial advisor who grew up in a financially unstable home in Chicago. Despite my difficult beginnings, I built a successful career and comfortable life. My relationship with my family, especially my parents, has always been strained due to money issues. Nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered last month when I found out someone had been opening credit cards in my name. Where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button to hear how I uncovered my family's shocking financial betrayal that changed everything. Growing up in Chicago, I started life in what seemed like a stable middle-class family. Our two-story house in a decent neighborhood gave no hint of the financial chaos that would eventually define my childhood. My mother Maria worked as a school administrator, while my father Frank held a steady position at an insurance company. From the outside, we appeared to be the perfect picture of financial responsibility. Everything changed when I turned 8. That was when Dad developed a gambling habit that started innocently with poker nights with friends, but quickly escalated to casino trips and sports betting. I remember the hushed arguments at night, thinking my brother Thomas and I couldn't hear them. But the walls in our house were thin, and the words, "just one more bet," and "I can win it back," became a familiar refrain. As Dad's gambling worsened, Mom developed her own unhealthy relationship with money. Shopping became her escape. She would come home with bags full of clothes and home decor we couldn't afford, justifying each purchase as necessary or on sale. It was her way of maintaining the appearance that everything was fine, even as our financial foundation crumbled. The first time they directly involved me in their financial problems, I was 10. Mom came into my room one evening, sat on my bed, and asked if she could borrow the birthday money my grandparents had given me. She promised to pay it back by the weekend. That weekend never came, neither did the money. I learned quickly. By 11, I had created hiding spots throughout my room for any cash I received. There was money taped inside my favorite books, stuffed in the toe of winter boots, and hidden in a hollowed-out section of my desk drawer. I became obsessed with keeping track of every dollar, counting and recounting my small savings daily. When I was 12, we moved to a smaller house in a neighborhood that Mom described as transitional. The reality was that we could no longer afford our previous lifestyle. Thomas, 4 years younger than me, didn't fully understand what was happening. He thought the move was an adventure, while I recognized it for what it was, financial freefall. Our new neighborhood meant a different school where designer clothes mattered. I had none. While other girls my age worried about their social status, I was calculating how many babysitting jobs it would take to buy myself new shoes since my old ones were falling apart. By 14, I was working every job I could legally hold. I delivered newspapers in the early morning, babysat in the evenings, and helped tutor younger kids on weekends. Every dollar went toward necessities my parents increasingly forgot to provide, plus a small savings account I opened with the help of my best friend's mother. I kept the account information hidden, knowing that any money visible to my parents would eventually disappear. It was during this time that I first became interested in financial literacy. The school library had outdated books on personal finance that I devoured, learning terms like compound interest, emergency fund, and budgeting. Knowledge became my power in a household where financial chaos reigned. As Thomas grew older, the dynamic in our family shifted. While I guarded my earnings fiercely, Thomas would freely give his allowance and later his part-time job money to our parents whenever they asked. This generosity made him the favorite, the good kid who understood family responsibility. What they called my prudence and self-protection, they labeled as selfishness. My high school years were a balancing act. I maintained good grades because I knew education was my ticket out all, while working nearly 30 hours a week. My friends went to parties and school events while I picked up extra shifts, saving for college applications and dreaming of financial stability. Home life deteriorated further as my parents' financial habits worsened. Dad would occasionally win big and promise a fresh start, only to lose twice as much the following week. Mom's shopping addiction expanded to include expensive home renovation projects that were often left half-finished when money ran out. Financial arguments became so normal in our household that dinner without a heated discussion about money felt strange and uncomfortable. I learned to eat quickly and excuse myself to do homework, developing the skill of emotional detachment that would both protect and haunt me later in life. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough for my first semester of college and secured a partial scholarship. More importantly, I had developed ironclad boundaries around money, vowing never to become like my parents. I didn't realize then that this determination would eventually lead to the greatest betrayal and the most painful decision of my life. My years at Illinois State University were defined by exhaustion and determination. With only a partial scholarship covering about 40% of my tuition, I worked multiple jobs to make up the difference and pay for living expenses. Weekdays were filled with classes evenings, with my job at the campus library, and weekends with shifts at a local coffee shop. Any spare hours went to tutoring other students for extra cash. Despite the grueling schedule, college represented freedom. Away from my family's financial chaos, I could finally breathe. I limited my visits home to major holidays, making excuses about work commitments to avoid longer stays. Each return to my parents' house felt like stepping back into a toxic cloud that threatened to follow me back to campus. The turning point in my college career came during my sophomore year when I took Introduction to Financial Planning with Professor Janet Williams. Unlike other professors who focus solely on theory, Professor Williams had worked 20 years as a certified financial planner before entering academia. She taught from experience, not just textbooks. After I earned the highest grade on a complex financial analysis project, Professor Williams asked me to stay after class. I worried I had somehow violated an academic policy, but instead she said something I will never forget. "You have a natural talent for this field and an unusual passion for someone your age. What drives you?" That simple question opened the floodgates. For the first time, I shared my family background with someone who truly understood the implications. Professor Williams didn't offer pity, which I would have rejected anyway. Instead, she offered mentorship, recommending additional coursework, and eventually helping me secure an internship at Gordon Financial Services, a respected financial planning firm in Chicago. That internship between junior and senior year changed everything. While most interns fetched coffee and made copies, I impressed the partners with my work ethic and knowledge. By the end of summer, they offered me a part-time position I could maintain remotely during my senior year, with the promise of full-time employment after graduation. Throughout these years, my contact with family remained minimal. Occasional phone calls with Mom consisted of her subtly fishing for information about my financial situation, while Dad would call only when he needed something. Thomas, now in high school, remained the dutiful son, still giving his earnings to help with family emergencies that never seemed to end. When I graduated with honors in finance, Professor Williams sat in the audience beaming proudly. My parents attended, but seemed uncomfortable among the other celebrating families. Mom commented that my graduation gown looked expensive and asked if I had to pay extra for the honors cords. Dad asked for a loan the same day, claiming he needed to cover the travel expenses they had incurred to attend my graduation. I declined. True to their word, Gordon Financial Services offered me an entry-level position after graduation. The salary was modest, but sufficient for me to rent a small one-bedroom apartment in Chicago and begin building my independent adult life. For the first time, I had health insurance, a retirement account, and a professional wardrobe that wasn't pieced together from thrift stores. Those early career years presented their own challenges. The financial industry remains predominantly male, and I encountered both subtle and overt sexism. Some clients questioned my credentials despite my education and training. Others asked when the actual advisor would join our meetings. Rather than becoming discouraged, I used these experiences as motivation, working longer hours and taking on the clients others deemed too difficult. My dedication paid off. Within 3 years, I had built a reputation for creating clear, actionable financial plans for young professionals and first-generation wealth builders. People who grew up like me, unsure of how to navigate financial systems designed for those already in the know, became my specialty. By 26, I was promoted to junior financial advisor with my own client portfolio. During these years of professional growth, I developed a personal philosophy about money that directly contradicted my upbringing. Where my parents saw money as something to spend as quickly as it arrived, I saw it as a tool for security and future options. where they borrowed freely without concern for repayment, I viewed debt as something to be approached cautiously and strategically. Where they hid from financial realities, I faced them directly, tracking every dollar and planning for contingencies. My growing success and independence created even more distance between my family and me. At occasional gatherings, the tension around money remained unspoken but palpable. Dad would make comments about people who get lucky in their careers. Mom would sigh about how some people forget where they came from once they achieve success. Thomas, now struggling through community college while still financially supporting our parents, was held up as the example of family loyalty I supposedly lacked. At 29, I took the biggest risk of my career by leaving Gordon Financial Services to start my own financial consulting business. Drawing on my specialized experience with first-generation wealth builders, I created a practice focused on helping people establish healthy financial foundations. Within 18 months, my client list had grown so much that I needed to hire an assistant, and my income had nearly doubled. As I approached my 32nd birthday, I had achieved what once seemed impossible: complete financial independence and security. I owned a comfortable condominium in a good neighborhood, had a thriving business, and had even made my first real estate investment purchasing a small rental property. The scared little girl who once hid money in her sock drawer had transformed into a confident financial advisor whose name was beginning to be recognized in Chicago financial circles. What I didn't realize was that my success had created not just envy within my family, but something far more dangerous: a sense of entitlement to the fruits of my labor. The financial stability I had built for myself was about to be threatened by the very people who should have celebrated it. At 32, my professional life couldn't have been better. My financial advising practice had grown to include 2 junior advisors and an office manager. I had been featured in Chicago Business Monthly as one of the top 40 financial advisors under 40, and had started receiving invitations to speak at industry conferences. The rental property I purchased the previous year was already showing promising appreciation. My personal life, however, had been largely on hold. Building my business left little time for dating or social activities. When my brother Thomas announced his engagement to his girlfriend Lisa, I was genuinely happy for him, but also reminded of how much family life I had missed during my years of career building. The wedding preparations drew me back into regular contact with my family after years of carefully managed distance. Mom called more frequently, updating me on wedding plans and not so subtly working financial questions into every conversation. "The caterer Thomas wants is so expensive. I wish we could afford something nicer for him." The implication was clear, though never directly stated I should contribute. I did send a generous check to help with wedding expenses, viewing it as a gift to Thomas rather than financial support for my parents. The wedding itself was surprisingly lavish, given my family's perpetual money problems. When I commented on the elaborate flower arrangements and premium open bar, Mom smiled tightly and said, "We wanted one special day without worrying about money. Isn't that what you're always able to do?" During the reception, Dad pulled me aside, champagne glass in hand, and told me he had finally gotten his gambling under control. "Been clean for 6 months," he said proudly. "Your mother and I are turning things around." I wanted to believe him, but the extravagance of the wedding suggested otherwise. Still, I offered congratulations and genuine hope that they had found financial stability at last. After the wedding, Thomas and Lisa moved into a starter home in a neighborhood they clearly couldn't afford. When I visited for their housewarming party, I noticed brand new furniture, high-end electronics, and other trappings of a lifestyle inconsistent with Thomas's entry-level position at an auto parts store and Lisa's job as a dental receptionist. "How are you managing the mortgage on this place?" I asked Thomas, privately, financial advisor instincts kicking in. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "We make it work. Lisa's parents helped with the down payment. Mom and Dad chip in sometimes." The math didn't add up, but I didn't press. It wasn't my place to manage my brother's finances, however concerning his situation appeared. Still, I left my business card with Lisa, offering a free financial planning session as a wedding gift. They never called. Family gatherings became more frequent after Thomas's wedding. Sunday dinners at my parents' house became a monthly obligation. During these meals, Mom would inevitably steer the conversation toward everyone's financial situations. Thomas and Lisa would discuss their struggles with mortgage payments or car repairs, while my parents would lament rising property taxes or unexpected medical bills. Then all eyes would turn to me. "And how's your business, Patricia?" Mom would ask, her tone suggesting that any answer indicating success would be a form of bragging. If I mentioned a professional achievement or new client, she would quickly redirect the conversation back to Thomas's challenges or their own financial woes. The comparison between my success and my family's struggles became increasingly explicit. "It must be nice," Mom would say after I mentioned a business trip, "to be able to travel whenever you want, while the rest of us can barely afford gas." Dad took a different approach, making direct requests. "That financial talk you gave at the conference," he said once. "What was your speaking fee? Enough to help your old man fix his truck." He laughed as though joking, but the expectation hung heavily in the air. I offered what I thought was a reasonable compromise: professional help rather than cash. "I'd be happy to sit down with each of you and create a financial plan," I said during one particularly tense dinner. "I do this for clients every day. We could look at budgeting, debt reduction strategies, retirement planning." The offer was met with uncomfortable silence, then rejected. "We don't need a lecture on spreadsheets," Mom said dismissively. "Families help each other in real ways." By real ways, she meant no questions asked money transfers, which I was unwilling to provide without addressing the underlying financial behaviors. Despite my reservations, I did give Thomas small loans on several occasions when he called with genuine emergencies, like when their furnace died in the middle of winter. I always created a simple repayment agreement which he signed with promises to stick to the schedule. He never made a single payment, and when I gently reminded him, he would say, "Things are tight right now. You know how it is. You're doing so well. This can't really matter to you." But it did matter. Not because of the money itself, but because of the pattern it represented, the same pattern I had witnessed and experienced throughout my childhood. The expectation that financial responsibility was optional within family relationships. As months passed, I began noticing strange mail arriving at my apartment. Credit card offers were common enough, but these were different, addressed to me, but referencing accounts I never opened. When I called one company to clarify, they confirmed they had sent the mail to my parents' address, not mine. The customer service representative explained they were sending promotional materials to existing cardholders. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I don't have an account with your company." "Our records show a card issued to Patricia Wilson at this address," she insisted, reading off my parents' address. "The account was opened 8 months ago." I ended the call telling myself there must be some computer error, but the knot in my stomach suggested otherwise. At the next family dinner, I casually mentioned receiving mail for accounts I never opened. I watched my parents' faces carefully as I spoke. Dad suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes. Mom changed the subject so quickly it was almost comical, launching into a story about the neighbor's new car. That dinner became the breaking point. As we finished dessert, Mom turned the conversation once again to finances. Thomas mentioned a promotion he was hoping for at work, and Lisa excitedly added that the extra income would help them start a family soon. "That would be wonderful," Mom said warmly, then turned to me with a completely different expression. "It's too bad your brother has to struggle so much while you live so comfortably. Success has made you forget what family means." The table fell silent. Even Thomas looked uncomfortable. "What exactly does family mean, Mom?" I asked quietly. "Does it mean supporting each other, or does it mean something else?" She fixed me with a cold stare I will never forget, and said the words that would change everything. "You're successful, they struggle more. The least you could do is help your family without all these questions and judgments." I left shortly afterward, my mind racing with suspicion and a terrible sense of clarity beginning to form. The strange mail, the comments, the constant requests for money, and the persistent guilt trips suddenly formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Something was very wrong, and I was determined to uncover exactly what my family had been hiding. That night after the disastrous family dinner, I couldn't sleep. Mom's cold statement kept replaying in my mind. "You're successful, they struggle more." The implication was clear. My success obligated me to support their financial irresponsibility without questions. As I tossed and turned, my phone rang. It was 10:30 in the evening, an unusual time for business calls. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway, thinking it might be a client emergency. "Hello, this is Patricia Wilson," I said professionally. "Ms. Wilson, this is Amanda from Capital Credit Services," a woman's voice responded. "I'm calling regarding your missed payment on your Platinum Rewards account. This is the third consecutive month with no payment, and I need to inform you that your account is now seriously delinquent." Confusion gave way to alarm. "There must be some mistake," I said. "I don't have an account with Capital Credit Services." "Ma'am, we have an account opened in your name with your Social Security number 18 months ago. The current balance is $12,436 and is now 120 days past due." My heart pounded as I asked for more information. The account billing address was my parents' house. Recent purchases included automotive parts furniture and several cash advances. The credit line had been nearly maxed out, and not a single payment had been made in months. After hanging up, I immediately pulled my credit report online, something I routinely recommended to clients, but had neglected for myself recently, due to my hectic work schedule. What I saw made me physically ill. There weren't just one or two unauthorized accounts. There were 7 credit cards, 2 personal loans, and a store financing agreement, all opened within the past 2 years, all in my name, and all linked to my parents' address. The total debt fraudulently created in my name exceeded $45,000. The sleepless night that followed was a blur of phone calls, emails, and documentation. I contacted each creditor explaining the situation and requesting fraud departments investigate. Some were understanding, others were suspicious, pointing out that most of the accounts had been open for months without any previous fraud claims from me. By morning, I had compiled a spreadsheet detailing every fraudulent account, complete with opening dates, credit limits, current balances, payment histories, and contact information for each company's fraud department. The evidence was undeniable. My family, the people who were supposed to protect me, had been systematically stealing my identity and destroying my credit. With shaking hands, I called my parents' house. Dad answered, his voice casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Dad," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "I need to talk to you and Mom about some credit accounts that were opened in my name." A long pause followed. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because I'm looking at a credit report showing 7 credit cards and 2 personal loans opened with my Social Security number but sent to your address. Cards that have purchased things like automotive parts, furniture, and electronics. Things I've seen in your house and Thomas's house." Another pause, then muffled sounds, as he presumably covered the phone to speak to someone else. Mom came on the line. "Patricia," she began, her tone defensive. "You need to calm down. We were going to tell you about those accounts. They were just temporary measures during some tight months." "Temporary measures? Some of these accounts were opened 2 years ago and have never received a single payment." "We've been meaning to catch up on the payments. Things have been difficult. Your father had medical bills, and Thomas needed help with the house down payment." Her casual admission of guilt stunned me. There was no denial, no real apology, just justification, as if identity theft was a normal family occurrence. "This isn't borrowing, Mom. This is fraud. You stole my identity." "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped. "Families help each other. You wouldn't give us the help we needed, so we had to find another way. If you had just given us the money when we asked, none of this would have happened." The conversation deteriorated from there. My mother alternated between defensive justification and manipulative guilt trips. My father got back on the phone to claim they had always intended to pay everything back. Neither seemed to grasp or care about the severity of what they had done. Later that day, I called Thomas, hoping my brother might show some understanding or remorse. Instead, he confirmed my worst fears. "You knew about this?" I asked, my voice breaking. His hesitation told me everything. "They said they had your permission at first. By the time I realized they didn't, things had gone too far." "I didn't know how to tell you." "You were at my house last month, Thomas. You sat on my couch and asked me for money for car repairs when you had already charged a set of tires to a fraudulent card in my name. How could you do that?" They're our parents, Patricia. What was I supposed to do? They needed help. You could have refused to participate in identity theft. You could have warned me. You could have done literally anything other than what you did. You don't understand what it's like for us, he said, his voice taking on the same righteous tone our mother used. You left and became successful. We've been here dealing with everything. Dad's health problems, the house repairs, everything. You abandoned us. That was the moment I realized how thoroughly toxic my family's financial dynamics had become. In their view, my financial success wasn't something to celebrate, but something to exploit. My refusal to fund their lifestyle wasn't seen as a healthy boundary, but as a moral failing. After hanging up with Thomas, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by credit reports and account statements, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to cry. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that came from a place of profound betrayal. The people who should have protected me, supported me, and celebrated my hard-won success had instead seen it as an opportunity to steal from me. When the tears finally stopped, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but now it was accompanied by resolve. I had spent my entire life fighting for financial security and helping others achieve the same. I couldn't allow anyone, even family, to take that away. I reached for my phone and called Professor Williams, the mentor who had guided me through college and early career challenges. After explaining the situation, I asked the question weighing heaviest on my mind. What do I do when the people who committed fraud against me are my own family? Her answer was both compassionate and firm. Patricia, if this were a client asking you this question, what would you advise them to do? I knew immediately. I would tell them to protect themselves, to take formal action, to recognize that love doesn't require victimhood. It was time to take my own professional advice. That evening, I faced the most difficult decision of my life. For hours, I sat at my dining table, surrounded by statements from fraudulent accounts, my credit reports showing the mounting damage, and a legal pad where I had written my options. The weight of what I needed to do pressed heavily on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I called Professor Williams again, desperate for reassurance that I wasn't overreacting or being unnecessarily harsh. Janet, I said, using her first name as she had insisted since my graduation, I know what I need to do, but I keep hesitating. They're still my family. Patricia, she replied gently. Family doesn't steal your identity. Family doesn't destroy your credit. Family doesn't blame you for their financial irresponsibility. What they've done isn't just morally wrong, it's criminal. But if I take formal action, I could be sending my own parents to jail. The consequences they face will be the result of their choices, not yours. You've offered help on reasonable terms, which they rejected. You've tried to establish healthy boundaries, which they violated. You've given them chances, which they exploited. At some point, protecting yourself isn't just an option, it's a necessity. Deep down, I knew she was right. If any client had come to me with this situation, my advice would be unequivocal. Take immediate action to stop the fraud, report it to the proper authorities, and protect your financial future. I needed to take my own professional advice. I spent the next several hours making difficult calls. First, I contacted every credit card company and financial institution where fraudulent accounts had been opened in my name. One by one, I went through the process of reporting identity theft, explaining that the accounts had been opened without my knowledge or consent. Some representatives were sympathetic, others skeptical. But I persisted, providing whatever documentation they requested. With each call, I formally canceled the cards and accounts, disputing all charges as fraudulent. I requested written confirmation of the closures and fraud investigations. By midnight, my voice was hoarse from repeating my personal information and explaining the situation over and over. But every single fraudulent account had been flagged and closed. The entire time my phone buzzed with incoming calls and texts from my parents and Thomas, which I ignored. I needed to complete this process without their manipulation or guilt trips interfering with my resolve. The messages ranged from confused, "Why is my card being declined?" to angry, "What have you done?" to manipulative, "Dad needs his heart medication. How could you do this?" After dealing with the immediate financial issues, I took the next necessary step. I filed formal identity theft reports with all three major credit bureaus, requesting fraud alerts and credit freezes to prevent any new accounts from being opened in my name. The representatives explained that these measures would make it impossible for anyone, including me, to open new credit accounts without additional verification steps, but the protection was worth the inconvenience. The most difficult step came last. After researching identity theft by family members, I understood that without a police report, many of the protections I needed would be unavailable to me. Credit card companies could claim I had given permission for the accounts if I didn't formally report the crime. My credit score would continue to suffer from the delinquent accounts if I didn't establish myself as a victim of fraud through official channels. At 2 in the morning, I sat at my computer and filled out an online police report documenting the identity theft in excruciating detail. When I reached the section asking for information about the suspects, my fingers froze over the keyboard. Typing my parents' and brothers' names as perpetrators of fraud against me felt like the ultimate betrayal, even though they were the ones who had betrayed me first. I almost closed the browser window, almost convinced myself I could handle this another way. Then I remembered the cold look in my mother's eyes as she said, "You're successful, they struggle more." I remembered the $45,000 of fraudulent debt in my name. I remembered that they had been doing this for years without remorse or intention to stop. I completed the report naming Maria Frank and Thomas Wilson as the individuals who had fraudulently used my personal information to open financial accounts without my knowledge or permission. I uploaded supporting documentation showing the accounts linked to their address and charges, matching items I had seen in their possession. When I finally clicked Submit, a strange mix of grief and relief washed over me. While waiting for confirmation of my police report submission, I researched identity theft attorneys and scheduled a consultation for the next day. I also set up comprehensive credit monitoring services that would alert me to any attempts to open new accounts or changes to existing ones. By the time dawn broke, I had done everything possible to protect myself financially and legally. The fraudulent accounts were closed, credit bureaus were notified, legal help was engaged, and a police report was filed. I had taken every step a financial advisor would recommend to a client in my situation. Yet, as I finally lay down to rest, the emotional weight of these actions crashed over me. I had officially accused my family of criminal activity. I had formally severed financial ties that, while toxic, were still connections to the only family I had ever known. I didn't regret my decisions, but I mourned what those decisions represented, the final acknowledgement that my family relationships were beyond repair. As I drifted into an exhausted sleep, my phone continued to buzz with increasingly desperate and angry messages from my family. The fallout was just beginning, and I knew the next confrontation would be even more difficult than the paper trail I had just created. I was awakened from my brief troubled sleep by pounding on my apartment door. Disoriented and exhausted from the emotional night, I stumbled to the entryway, checking the peephole before opening. No one was visible, which struck me as strange. Then I noticed something even more alarming. The door was already slightly ajar, though I was certain I had locked it before going to bed. Fully alert now, I pushed the door open wider and felt a rush of cold morning air. My front door was not just unlocked, but had been left wide open with signs that someone had forcibly entered. The decorative table in my entryway was askew, and several items were missing, including the spare key I kept hidden in a drawer. Heart racing, I quickly checked the rest of my apartment. Nothing of significant value appeared to be taken, no electronics or jewelry. But my home office had been disturbed. The file cabinet containing personal documents was open with several folders clearly rifled through. My financial documents, including statements from my legitimate accounts, were scattered across the desk. Most telling of all, the folder containing all my identity theft documentation and evidence against my family was missing. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had been in my home. While I slept, my family had let themselves in and gone through my personal belongings. They hadn't come to talk or apologize. They had come to remove evidence of their fraud. With shaking hands, I called the police, reporting the break-in and connecting it to the identity theft report I had filed just hours earlier. While waiting for officers to arrive, I called a locksmith for an emergency service call and a security company to install a system that same day. As I paced anxiously, my phone rang. It was Thomas. How could you do this to them? He demanded without preamble. The police showed up at Mom and Dad's house this morning. Do you have any idea how upset they are? Do you have any idea how upset I am that someone broke into my apartment this morning? I countered. Or that my own family has stolen my identity and racked up tens of thousands in fraudulent debt in my name? That was just a misunderstanding. They were going to pay it all back eventually. You didn't have to get the police involved. A misunderstanding? Thomas, this has been going on for years. Those accounts were maxed out with zero payments made. That's not a misunderstanding, that's systematic fraud. They're your parents. They raised you. You owe them. I owe them respect and gratitude when it's earned. I don't owe them my credit score or financial future. And I certainly don't owe them the right to break into my home. Nobody broke in, he said, his voice suddenly evasive. Mom has a key. A key I never gave her. A key she must have copied without my permission when she visited last Christmas. That's not having a key, Thomas. That's another violation of my boundaries. The conversation ended abruptly when I heard another knock at the door. The police had arrived, 2 officers looking professionally concerned, as I explained both the identity theft and the break-in. They took photos of the disturbed areas of my apartment, noted the missing documents, and connected this report to my earlier identity theft filing. As one officer was asking about possible entry points, a car screeched to a halt outside my building. Through the still open door, I watched in disbelief as my parents emerged from their aging sedan, faces contorted with anger. Behind them, Thomas and Lisa pulled up in a separate vehicle. Ms. Wilson, the officer said quietly, are these the individuals you named in your identity theft report? I nodded, a knot forming in my stomach. Yes, those are my parents and my brother and sister-in-law. My mother spotted the police cruiser and faltered momentarily before marching toward my apartment, my father following close behind. The officers moved to intercept them at the building entrance. Ma'am, sir, I need you to stop right there, the taller officer commanded, hand raised. This is my daughter's apartment, Mom declared indignantly. I have every right to be here. Actually, you don't, the officer replied. Ms. Wilson has reported both identity theft and a break-in, and you've been named as suspects. I need you to step back. What followed was a scene I never imagined would play out in my life. My mother, always so concerned with appearances, began shouting in full view of my neighbors, many of whom had emerged from their apartments to watch the commotion. She alternated between accusations that I was an ungrateful daughter and claims that there was a misunderstanding about the credit accounts. Dad stood by, red-faced and silent, until one officer mentioned potential charges, at which point he exploded with his own tirade about family loyalty and how I had always been selfish and thought I was better than everyone else. Thomas tried to play mediator, suggesting we handle this privately as a family, seemingly oblivious to the fact that the time for private resolution had passed the moment they decided to steal my identity and break into my home. Neighbors I had exchanged nothing more than polite nods with for years now witnessed my family imploding on our shared front lawn. Mrs. Gonzalez from apartment 3B stood in her doorway, arms crossed and eyes narrowed at my parents. Mr. Patel from across the hall watched silently, his expression a mixture of concern and discomfort. Even the usually standoffish college students from the ground floor had paused their morning routines to witness the drama. The most surreal moment came when my mother, frustrated that her emotional manipulation wasn't working on the officers, turned to appeal directly to my watching neighbors. My daughter has everything, she announced to the unwitting audience. A successful business, a beautiful home, money in the bank. And she won't help her family when we're struggling. What kind of person does that make her? Before anyone could respond, I stepped forward, drawing strength from the absurdity of the situation and the clarity of the previous night's decisions. The kind of person who worked hard for everything she has. I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The kind of person who offered real help, which you rejected because it came with expectations of responsibility. The kind of person who doesn't believe family means unlimited access to steal from each other. My mother's face contorted with rage. After everything we did for you, like what Mom teaching me that my boundaries don't matter, showing me that family means exploitation, using my success as justification to commit crimes against me. Yes, thank you so much for those valuable lessons. The officers, sensing the situation escalating, suggested my family leave the premises immediately or face potential trespassing charges, in addition to the pending identity theft investigation. Dad grabbed Mom's arm and pulled her toward their car, muttering about ungrateful children and seeing how she likes having no family. Thomas lingered behind his expression, torn between the lifelong pattern of siding with our parents and some dawning recognition of the gravity of their actions. "Patricia," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this. We can work something out." We could have worked something out months ago, years ago, when I offered to help create financial plans for all of you. You chose this path, not me. "So, that's it. You're just cutting us off completely. You cut me off when you decided my credit and financial security were yours to take. You cut me off when you broke into my home. You cut me off every time you chose their toxic patterns over basic decency." Thomas shook his head, the familiar look of disappointment settling on his features. "You'll regret this. Family is all you have in the end." "No," I replied, suddenly certain of a truth I had been avoiding for years. "Family is supposed to be people who support your growth, not exploit it. People who celebrate your success, not resent it. People who respect your boundaries, not violate them. If that's not what I have in you, then maybe I'm better off finding those qualities elsewhere." As they drove away, my mother's final threat lingered in the air. "Don't come crying to us when you realize how alone you really are." I stood in my doorway watching their cars disappear down the street, feeling a complex mixture of grief, anger, and surprising relief. The family that had shaped my earliest understanding of love and loyalty had just confirmed what I had suspected for years. Their version of family was conditional, transactional, and ultimately destructive. The locksmith arrived shortly after changing every lock in my apartment. The security company followed, installing sensors on all windows and doors, with monitoring I could access from my phone. By evening, my home was physically secure again, though the emotional security I sought would take much longer to rebuild. That night alone in my newly fortified apartment, I received text messages from several neighbors expressing support. Mrs. Gonzalez brought over homemade empanadas with a note saying, "Family is who treats you like family, not just who shares your blood." Mr. Patel offered to keep an eye on my apartment whenever he was home. Even the college students downstairs said they would alert me to any suspicious people hanging around the building. In the space of 24 hours, I had lost the family I was born into, but discovered the potential for a chosen family among people who had witnessed my vulnerability and responded with kindness rather than exploitation. It wasn't a fair trade, not really. The wound of familial betrayal would take years to heal. But it was a beginning, a first step toward building relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation and manipulation. As I prepared for bed that night, exhausted but resolute, I realized something important. The open door I had discovered that morning wasn't just evidence of a break-in. It was symbolic proof of what my family truly valued. Not me, not our relationship, not even basic respect for my home and privacy. They valued access to what I had built, what I had earned, what I had protected. And when that access was threatened, they had shown exactly who they were. The door was closed now, locked and secured against further intrusions. The metaphor wasn't lost on me as I finally drifted into the first peaceful sleep I'd had since discovering their betrayal. 6 months passed before I truly began to feel like myself again. The immediate aftermath of cutting ties with my family involved navigating legal processes I never imagined would be part of my life. The identity theft case proceeded slowly through the system, with my parents eventually accepting a plea deal that included probation mandatory financial counseling and restitution payments for the fraudulent debts they had created in my name. Thomas and Lisa avoided criminal charges by demonstrating they hadn't personally opened any accounts, though evidence suggested they had benefited from and been aware of the fraud. Our relationship remained severed with occasional text messages from Thomas that alternated between guilt trips and awkward attempts at reconciliation without acknowledging the harm done. The legal resolution brought practical closure, but left emotional wounds that required different treatment. On the recommendation of a colleague, I began seeing Dr. Harper, a therapist specializing in family trauma and financial abuse, a term I had never applied to my situation until she gently suggested it during our first session. Financial abuse isn't just something that happens in romantic relationships, she explained. It occurs in families too, especially when there are power imbalances or when someone's success creates resentment. Those weekly sessions became a lifeline as I processed decades of unhealthy financial dynamics and boundary violations. Dr. Harper helped me recognize patterns I had normalized: the childhood borrowing that was never repaid, the guilt attached to my financial success, the expectation that family entitled my parents to unlimited access to my resources. Most importantly, she helped me address the pervasive guilt that followed my decision to press charges and cut contact. You can love someone and still need to protect yourself from them, she reminded me often. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're self-preservation. With her guidance, I gradually redefined my understanding of family. Blood relationships had failed me, but other connections began filling the void. Professor Williams remained a steady presence, checking in regularly and inviting me to holiday meals when she knew I might be feeling the absence of family traditions. My assistant Megan, initially just an employee, became a trusted friend who understood the significance when I finally felt comfortable giving her an emergency key to my office, a sign of trust I couldn't have imagined extending months earlier. Neighbors from my apartment building who had witnessed my family's public meltdown formed an unexpected support network. Mrs. Gonzalez taught me to make her famous empanadas during impromptu Sunday cooking lessons. Mr. Patel invited me to celebrate Diwali with his extended family, an experience that showed me what supportive family relationships could look like. Even my professional life transformed in unexpected ways. During a client meeting 3 months after the break-in, a young woman named Alexis broke down crying while describing financial pressure from her parents. Her situation mirrored aspects of my own experience, and for the first time I carefully shared elements of my story. "I never thought of it as financial abuse," Alexis said, wiping away tears. "I just thought I was being selfish for not wanting to support them." That conversation sparked an important realization. My experience, painful as it was, could help others recognize and address similar situations. With Dr. Harper's guidance on maintaining appropriate professional boundaries, I began incorporating financial abuse education into my practice, developing resources specifically for clients, navigating unhealthy financial relationships with family members. Word spread about this specialization, and soon I was receiving referrals specifically for this work. I partnered with a local domestic violence organization to provide financial literacy workshops, helping participants recognize signs of financial control and abuse in various relationships. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply fulfilling, transforming my personal trauma into something that could help others. Beyond professional applications, I found ways to channel my experience into broader positive impact. Remembering how financial education had been my lifeline as a teenager, I established a scholarship fund for students from financially unstable backgrounds pursuing careers in finance or business. The application essay asked students to describe how they developed financial literacy despite challenges, and reading their stories reminded me that resilience comes in many forms. As the 1-year anniversary of my family's betrayal approached, I felt myself standing on firmer emotional ground. The sharp pain had dulled to a manageable ache. I could go days without thinking about them, whereas initially they had dominated my thoughts constantly. I had created new traditions, new connections, and new meaning from the wreckage of what I had lost. It was during this period of relative stability that I met David at a financial literacy fundraiser. An architect with his own complicated family history, he understood boundaries in a way previous romantic interests hadn't. On our third date, when I cautiously shared abbreviated versions of my family situation, his response was refreshingly straightforward. "Family should be a source of support, not a drain on your life force," he said without a hint of judgment. "I'm sorry you went through that, but I admire how you've handled it." As our relationship developed, David demonstrated consistent respect for my financial independence, insisting on alternating who paid for dates and maintaining clear communication about shared expenses when we traveled together. These might seem like small gestures, but to someone with my history, they represented a fundamental understanding of healthy financial boundaries. 6 months into our relationship, I experienced a moment of panic when David asked if I would co-sign on a car loan. My immediate internal reaction was alarm, old fears surfacing about financial entanglements. Before I could respond, he quickly added, "Actually, forget I asked that. I know your history with financial boundaries. I can get approved on my own, it might just take a different lender." His immediate self-correction, the awareness of how such a request might affect me, brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for understanding," I said. "It's not that I don't trust you, it's just—" "You don't have to explain," he interrupted gently. "Good boundaries make good relationships. I should have thought before asking." That moment cemented something important in our relationship. The understanding that my financial boundaries weren't a rejection of intimacy, but a necessary protection of hard-won security. As we continued building our relationship, we established clear financial practices that honored both our independence and our growing partnership. Around the 18-month mark after the break-in, I received an unexpected letter from my mother. The return address made my hands shake as I opened it, unsure what manipulation or guilt trip awaited inside. Instead, I found something unexpected: a check for partial restitution of the fraudulent debts and a brief note. "Patricia," it read, "this is the first payment toward what we owe. The court ordered it, but I want you to know I would be sending it anyway. The financial counseling program has helped me understand what we did wrong. I don't expect forgiveness or a relationship, but I want you to know I recognize the harm we caused. Maria." No excuses, no manipulation, no request for reconciliation. Just acknowledgement and action. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the closest thing to accountability my mother had ever offered. I deposited the check and filed the note away, neither responding nor discarding it. Some wounds may never fully heal, but this small gesture suggested that perhaps my parents were finally facing the reality of their actions. 2 years after severing ties with my family, I found myself in a place I couldn't have imagined during those dark days, following the discovery of their betrayal. I had built a thriving practice focused on helping others establish healthy financial boundaries. I had created meaningful relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I had even found love with someone who understood that independence and intimacy could coexist beautifully. Most importantly, I had learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's an act of self-care. And true family, celebrates your success rather than seeing it as something to exploit. The journey from betrayal to healing wasn't linear, and I still have moments of grief for what my family relationships could have been. But I've come to accept that sometimes the healthiest family is the one you choose, the one you build deliberately with people who understand that love should lift you up, not drag you down. For anyone watching this who recognizes elements of their own family dynamics in my story, please know that you deserve financial security and healthy boundaries. Your success isn't something to feel guilty about, and anyone who tries to make you feel otherwise is showing you who they really are. Trust that revelation protect yourself, and know that healing is possible on the other side of even the most painful betrayals. Has your family ever made you feel guilty about your success or pressured you to provide financial support? Share your experience in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of overcoming financial abuse and building better boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, true family celebrates your growth rather than exploiting it.